You walk in like time forgot to keep you in check, like the rules don't apply, like the world's been playing checkers while you've been quietly perfecting chess. There's something off about you. And by off, I mean dangerous. Not the kind they warn kids about, no. The kind they pretend doesn't exist because it makes the rest of them look ordinary. You move like you already know how this ends, like you've already been here, left, rewound the tape, and decided to watch it all again, just for fun. You think years ahead while they think in loops. You walk into a room and the conversations feel like deja vu, like rewinds of tapes you've already thrown out. They talk about what's trending, what's now, what's safe. You sit there calculating outcomes 3 steps after the applause dies. It's not even difficult. It's not magic. It's just clarity. The kind that makes people nervous. You see a headline and you already know the fallout. They chase the sparks. You study the explosion before it even lights. You talk and they stare like you're reciting riddles. But those aren't riddles. They're just realities their clocks haven't caught up to. You make a move and they call it risky. Until 5 years later, when the world claps for doing what you did with your eyes closed, by then you've already moved on. Because what's the point in repeating yourself when the world finally understands what you meant the first time? It's not about being right. It's about seeing the curve before it bends. That's you. That's always been you. They try to put you in meetings, label you, package you, but your thoughts don't come in boxes. You sit in silence while they argue over strategies you predicted months ago. You smile, not because you're polite, but because watching people scramble toward what you've already outgrown is the kind of comedy no one dares laugh at. You're the kind of mind that gets misunderstood on Monday, mocked on Tuesday, feared on Wednesday, and finally followed on Friday. But by then, you're already on next year's page. You don't play games, you redesign them. You don't wait for the green light, you reroute the street, because the future isn't some distant myth to you. It's a blueprint burned behind your eyes, and that scares them. Oh, it terrifies them, because you break the loop. You challenge their rhythm. You walk in with a question that makes their entire system stutter. Not because you're trying to cause chaos, but because you're allergic to sleepwalking through recycled ideas, dressed in new colors. People don't understand you, not because you're complicated, but because they're committed to thinking small. They think a year ahead and pat themselves on the back. You think in decades. You calculate impact. You whisper what they'll scream later. And when it finally clicks for them, it's not awe they feel, it's discomfort. Because realizing someone saw it all before it happened forces them to look at how blind they were. And no one likes feeling blind, so they call you arrogant, detached, too intense. But really, you're just done pretending the race is fair when you already read the map. You build in silence. You don't post every move. You let results speak in a language louder than noise. And while they update their status, you're upgrading your code. You're not busy. You're building. And that building doesn't always come with congratulations. Sometimes it comes with isolation. Blank stares, with that's impossible from people too scared to try. But that doesn't stop you, never did, because you're not here to be understood. You're here to be undeniable. And it's funny, really. They think you're lucky when it works, but they weren't there when you were laughed at, when you were quiet, when you were doubted by the same mouths now shouting your name. They think you popped up out of nowhere, but you were planning this in the dark while they chased comfort. While they looped around the same mistakes, you learned from them, sharpened yourself with them. You didn't wait for change, you became it. You didn't adapt to the future, you brought it with you. So now they ask how you knew, how you predicted the shift. And you could explain it, sure, but would they really listen? Would they hear the sleepless nights, the rewired thinking, the rejection turned rocket fuel? No, because people want results, not reasons. They want the shine, not the shadow behind it. But you're not in it for the applause. You're in it for the aftermath, for the long game. The legacy, the disruption that leaves a mark too deep to erase, because thinking years ahead, that's not a skill for you, that's survival, that's instinct, that's your default setting. You don't adapt to the future, you are the future. You don't walk in and figure out the rules, you walk in and make them irrelevant. People scramble when the world changes. They panic, restructure, rebrand, try to stay relevant. But you don't flinch. Because where they see chaos, you see confirmation. You were never trying to fit in. You were just waiting for the timeline to catch up. They keep saying the world is shifting like it's news, like they weren't warned. But you were built in the shift, forged under pressure, wired for the storm, born in a glitch they didn't see coming. They call it innovation when the system adjusts. You call it Tuesday. They write think pieces, hold panels, hire consultants to understand what's next, and you sit there amused because their future is your leftover blueprint. They mistake your calm for confusion, but it's not. It's calculation. It's design. It's the stillness of someone who's already seen the next version of this conversation, and the next, and the next. You don't react to what's happening. You predict what's next. Because reacting is survival. Predicting, that's power. You're not here to adapt. You're here to redefine. There's no version of the game you're interested in playing, because you never signed up for survival. You came for transformation, for disruption, for those uncomfortable silences when people realize they've been moving in circles and you've been moving in dimensions. They don't get it. They think you're difficult, cold, detached. But the truth is, you just don't have time for the repetition of outdated dreams. You're not from here. You're not for now. You're here as a reminder that normal was never supposed to last. So they call you ahead of your time. That's what they say when they can't decode you. Ahead of your time is what the world labels someone they're too slow to understand. But you don't need the label. You wear invisibility like armor until it becomes visibility by force. You don't beg to be seen. You show up when it's undeniable. And by the time they try to imitate you, you're already somewhere else, unreachable, untouched, uninterested in applause. Because the real win isn't being followed. It's being impossible to replicate. They update their apps, you update your mind. They look for shortcuts, you build new roads. They optimize, you revolutionize. You see a wall and don't ask how to climb it. You wonder why it's still standing, because you weren't taught to navigate limitations. You were designed to erase them. They'll never understand that kind of mind. Not fully, because to them, the future is a goal. But to you, the future is muscle memory. It's a language you speak without effort, a rhythm that pulses in your thoughts while they're still memorizing yesterday's lyrics. They tell you to slow down, to explain yourself, to make your vision more palatable. But truth doesn't always come with a soft voice. Some truths feel like fire alarms. Some truths need to break glass to be heard. And you are that kind of truth. You burn through denial. You dismantle comfort. You make people question their timelines, and not because you said something outrageous, but because you exist in a way they didn't think it was possible. You live the version of reality they were too afraid to imagine. They keep asking what school you went to, what book you read, what strategy you used, thinking they'll find the answer in a step-by-step format. But the truth, you are the method. You are the proof that some people aren't made. They're released, and once you're released, you don't fit into frameworks. You bend them, break them, replace them. Your very presence forces evolution. That's why they don't know what to do with you, because you don't ask for change. You are the change before they even realize they need it. They want to study you, dissect your thinking, turn your instincts into curriculum. But there's no course on disruption, no class for original blood. You don't teach it, you embody it. And the future, the real future, isn't something you wait for, it's something you become. While they try to prepare for tomorrow, you remember it. Like a memory out of order, like time slipped up and let you peak too soon. And instead of forgetting what you saw, you decided to bring it with you, to wear it, to speak it, to live it. You decode systems before they know they're broken. That's your little trick, isn't it? You walk into a room, eyes scanning, brain already 10 steps in. Everyone else is playing by instructions printed years ago, taped to the wall by someone who doesn't even work there anymore. And you're not even reading the manual. You're rewriting it. While they scramble to keep the engine running, you're already beneath the floorboards, listening to the hum, feeling where the wires fray, where the sparks will fly. They don't see the cracks. You hear them whisper. People love structure. Oh, they worship it, even if it's rotting from the inside. They'd rather cling to a burning blueprint than admit it's time to start over, but not you. You smell dysfunction the way a wolf smells fear. It's in the way they avoid questions, in the way they repeat phrases like chants, in the way nobody in the system can explain why it works. They just say it does. You laugh at that, not out loud, no, that would ruin the show. You smile instead, that quiet smirk that says you already know where this is headed. You don't fight systems head on. That's not your style. You infiltrate, you study, you press on the pressure points just to see which ones bruise. Not because you want chaos, but because you're allergic to illusions. In most systems, they're built on denial dressed up as order. They pretend the cracks don't matter. They throw paint over mold and call it innovation. But you see through all of it. Your mind is like X-ray vision, pulling apart logic, flipping it upside down, asking questions no one dared to think. Not because they couldn't, because they were too comfortable not to. They think you're difficult, you know that. They've said it behind closed doors in whispers. Too intense, too skeptical, doesn't follow protocol, as if that's a bad thing. But deep down, they know the truth. You're not a threat because you break rules. You're a threat because you expose the ones that never made sense to begin with. The ones they built their safety on. The ones that keep the machine turning. Not because it's efficient, but because no one had the nerve to stop it. And when you do speak, it's like a hammer to glass, not because you shout, but because your questions cut straight through the pretense. You ask why, and they freeze. You say, prove it, and they stall, because nobody trained them for scrutiny. They were trained for compliance, for echo chambers, for round tables where everyone agrees and nothing changes. But you walk in and the air shifts. The walls get nervous, because the moment you see through something, it starts unraveling. There's something dangerous about a mind that doesn't accept things at face value. It terrifies people, because most systems survive on assumption, on the unspoken agreement that no one asks too much. But you ask, not loudly, but relentlessly. You peel layers, you find contradictions, you hold up the mirror they've avoided for years and dare them to look. Not everyone does. Some blink, some break, some call you a problem. But even as they curse you, they know you've always known. Even before the chaos, even when things looked smooth on the outside, you sensed it. The instability, the imbalance, the lie. And while others ignored it, you documented it, quietly, patiently. Like a scientist studying an organism about to mutate. You weren't waiting for it to fall apart. You were watching how it would. That's the difference. Most people are surprised by collapse. You saw it coming. You predicted the pattern, because patterns are your playground. They don't get how you do it. They think you're just lucky, just cynical, just guessing. But it's none of those things. You just see. While they fix the surface, you trace the rot to its source. And the deeper you dig, the clearer it gets. Systems don't fail suddenly. They fail slowly, silently, and then all at once. You just happen to see the slow and silent before the explosion. And instead of running, you stand in it. You study the smoke, you read the ruins, you take notes while everyone else panics. And it's not that you enjoy watching things fall apart. No, that would be too easy. You need to see the break so you can rebuild it. But better, sharper, real. Because you're not a destroyer. You're a revealer, a decoder, and the world hates nothing more than someone who can translate the truth before the lie even finishes its sentence. They say time heals all things, but they never mention how memory doesn't play by those rules. You could be standing in the present, all grown up, all polished, saying the right things, paying your bills, shaking hands, making eye contact, and then something slips through the cracks. A sound, a word, a smell, and suddenly you're 10 years old again, staring at a door that never opened, waiting for an apology that never came. That's the thing about scars. They don't ask for permission before they remind you they're still there. They thought you forgot, or maybe they hoped you did, that if they smiled wide enough, if they talked fast enough, you'd skip over the betrayal, the abandonment, the nights spent asking why you weren't enough. But you didn't forget, you just carried it differently. You folded it up and tucked it into your laugh. You buried it behind jokes. You dragged it through the years like a shadow no one else could see. And they wonder why you walk like the ground is always shifting. It's because for you, it always has been. You became your own anchor. That's the part they never saw. While they moved on, you stitched yourself back together in the dark. No applause, no witnesses, just grit. Just the decision to keep moving even when every part of you screams stop. You learned not to cry where people could see. You learned to bite your tongue so hard it bled. You learned to stand still while everything else burned. Because if you moved, it meant you'd break. And you didn't have time to break. No one ever gave you that luxury. So now they look at you and they see strength. They say you're tough, resilient. But what they really mean is, I don't know how you're still standing. They don't see the price. They don't see what it costs to become unshakable. They think your silence is peace. They don't realize it's strategy. You don't speak because you're calm. You speak only when it matters. Because you learned that talking is cheap in a world that never really listened. You built yourself from scratch, piece by jagged piece. No map, no mentor, just instincts. And every time someone tried to erase you, every time they overlooked you, mocked you, underestimated you, you made a mental note. Not out of spite, but out of precision. Because one day you knew the light would hit just right. And when it did, every person who wrote you off would have to squint to see what they missed. You didn't rise because someone gave you permission. You rose because there was no other choice. And maybe that's what they'll never understand. Some of us weren't saved. We weren't guided. We weren't protected. We were forged. And you don't come out of that clean. You come out raw, a little bent, a little too aware. You see things other people ignore. You recognize pain hiding in small talk. You hear fear in the tone of someone pretending to be fine. Because you've been there. You built a home there. You learned to smile with your teeth and fight with your eyes. You learned that trust isn't something you give, it's something people earn. And even then, you keep a backup plan. Not because you're paranoid, but because you've been left enough times to know how quickly people vanish. You don't panic when things fall apart. That's your comfort zone. You start building before the dust even settles. They tried to erase you, not always with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes by never calling your name, sometimes by pretending you were invisible. But you were never really gone. You were just waiting for the right moment, not to prove them wrong, but to prove yourself right. That voice inside you that kept whispering, "You matter," even when no one else said it. That voice is why you're still here. That voice is why, despite it all, you didn't fade. And now they're watching. Not because they care, but because they're confused. Because you weren't supposed to make it this far. You were supposed to break, to disappear, to become another what happened to them story. But you didn't. You outlived their expectations. You flipped the script without saying a word. And now they whisper about your name, like it's a glitch in their system. A reminder that not everything can be erased. It's funny, isn't it? How the world pretends it's fair. They hand out rules like candy, sweet on the surface, but poison in the center. Work hard, they say. Be good, follow the path. And what do you get? A seat at the table? No. You get to clean the table after the feast. You get to clap for others while your own hands bleed. And if you dare to ask why, if you dare to question the design, they look at you like you're the problem, like the glitch is in you, not the game. You ever notice how quickly people forget what they owe? One moment, you're the hero. The next, you're an inconvenience. As long as you're useful, they'll sing your name. But the second you speak out of turn, the second you stop smiling on cue, suddenly you're difficult, uncooperative, a liability. No one ever says it out loud, of course. They just start leaving you off the invites. They stop looking you in the eye. They rewrite the story while you're still in it. And they call that professionalism. You didn't ask to be different. You didn't wake up one day and decide, let me make life harder. But here you are, shaped by fire, molded by rejection, carved by the blade of being overlooked. And you didn't crumble. You adapted. You learned how to walk into rooms that didn't want you and own them anyway. You didn't match the script, so you wrote your own lines. They hated that. They still do. Because nothing scares a system more than someone who doesn't need its approval. You know what's dangerous about you? You kept receipts. Not literal ones. Mental ones. Every time they lied, dismissed you, laughed at your ideas, you took note. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity, because someday when the tables turn, and they always do, you won't need to raise your voice. You'll just raise your presence. And suddenly, they'll remember. Suddenly, they'll find your number again. Funny how that works. Funny how invisible becomes irreplaceable when the tides shift. They tried to bury you under expectations you never agreed to. Told you what success should look like, how you should speak, how you should shrink yourself to fit their comfort. But you didn't play along. You didn't dim your fire to keep them warm. You let them be uncomfortable. You made them stare into the light they tried to snuff out, and they didn't know what to do with that. They still don't. Because people like you don't show up in their blueprints. You're the variable they couldn't calculate. You weren't just underestimated, you were actively suppressed. Because your presence demanded truth, and truth is inconvenient in places built on denial. So they labeled you too intense, too emotional, too ambitious. As if that was a flaw, as if intensity is anything but clarity sharpened into action, as if emotion isn't the language of the human spirit, as if ambition is something to apologize for. They tried to make you feel guilty for wanting more, like you were stealing something that was never theirs to gatekeep. And you kept showing up. Not because it was easy, not because it was fun, but because you refused to disappear. They mistook your silence for surrender. They thought because you weren't shouting, you weren't building, but you were. Quietly, strategically. While they were laughing, you were laying foundations. While they were doubting, you were sharpening your edge. You didn't need their spotlight. You brought your own fire. And now, they can't ignore the glow. It's not about revenge. It never was. That's what they'll never understand. You didn't climb out of the pit to prove them wrong. You did it to prove you were right, that your worth wasn't up for debate, that your existence wasn't conditional, that your voice mattered even when it shook, even when it echoed off walls that refused to echo back. You chose to matter, you declared it, and now, whether they like it or not, they have to reckon with that choice. There's a certain madness to surviving this world with your soul intact, a certain defiance in standing tall after everything tried to bend you. You wear your resilience like armor now, not flashy, not loud, just there, heavy, earned. They don't see the weight of it, they don't see the nights behind it, they only see the glare when the light hits just right. But you remember every crack, every stitch, every time you had to glue yourself back together with nothing but hope and teeth-clenched determination. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's story? Like you were handed a script at birth, but the lines never fit your mouth? Be nice, say thank you. Don't make a scene. So you played along. You smiled when it hurt. You laughed when it wasn't funny. You nodded when everything inside you was screaming no. And for a while it worked. You blended in. You became what they wanted. A puppet with polite hands and quiet eyes. But deep down something festered, something raw, something real. And it didn't want to stay quiet, and they wanted you predictable, easy to categorize, one-dimensional, preferably smiling, because people don't know what to do with contradictions, with someone who's both kind and furious, both compassionate and unwilling to be walked on. You walked that tightrope long enough to bleed from the soles of your feet. You kept it all together so well they started to believe you were unbreakable. And that's the most dangerous illusion of all. Because when you finally cracked, when you stopped pretending, they called you unstable, as if your honesty was the problem. What they don't understand is you didn't break. You evolved. You stopped apologizing for existing, for feeling too much, wanting too much, being too much. You realized that shrinking yourself to fit into their tiny boxes was a form of slow death, and you chose life. Messy, chaotic, unapologetic life. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that walks into rooms like it owns the floor, even when it's limping, especially when it's limping. Because power isn't in perfection. It's in showing up when every bone in your body says, stay down. They wanted you tame, you gave them truth. They wanted a whisper, you gave them thunder. And now they're uncomfortable. Of course they are. You were never supposed to speak that loudly, laugh that freely, take up that much space. But here you are, a living contradiction, a reminder that survival doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it looks like grit under your nails and a grin that dares the world to push one more time. You walk different now, not because you've healed, but because you carry your wounds with style. You turned your scars into punctuation, each one a sentence that says, I made it through this. And they hate that they can't erase it, that no matter how much they try to rewrite your history, you keep showing up as proof. Proof that silence doesn't equal weakness, that smiling doesn't mean surrender, that some of us learn to dance in the fire, not because we wanted to, but because no one ever taught us to run. The system wasn't built for you. It wasn't built for the loud ones, the wild ones, the ones who ask too many questions and don't stop at easy answers. It was built to break you gently over time so you wouldn't notice. So you'd call it maturity, call it growth, call it professionalism, but somewhere along the way you woke up, you saw the cracks. You realized the house was on fire and they were selling cans, so you picked up your truth, soaked it in gasoline, and set your own path ablaze. You don't owe anyone an explanation for surviving, for doing what you had to do to stay afloat in a world that told you you were too heavy. You were never too heavy. You were just carrying the weight of every version of yourself that wasn't allowed to breathe. And now that you've let them speak, now that you've given them space, they don't want to be silenced again. They want to live. All of them. The angry you, the scared you, the bold, reckless, heart-goodig for its own good you. They all matter. They're all valid. They all have stories to scream into the night. You're not here to make people comfortable. You're not here to be liked or approved or stamped with a gold star for good behavior. You're here to be you, in full volume, in full color, even when it shakes the room, especially when it shakes the room. Because if you can walk through hell and still light candles for others, then maybe the story was never about pain. Maybe it was about becoming the kind of person who could survive it and still choose to be kind. Let them talk. Let them call you dramatic, difficult, intense. They called the stars chaotic once too, until they learned how to measure the light. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're just finally becoming what they tried so hard to erase.